everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. I, of course, am your host, Todd Embley, and I'm thrilled to welcome Gordon Domlija, a 20-year veteran of the marketing world who's been based in the APAC region since 2008. Gordon, we're really excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
All right. So where in the world are you today that we're recording you from?
Today, I'm at home in Singapore, where it is as relentlessly, simultaneously sunny, rainy, and humid as you would expect sitting on the equator.
Yes. We had a little preamble before we recorded all about living in really, really humid places. I'm impressed. You must be indoors because you are wearing a nice coat, a nice jacket. So
I was told in the invitation to dress up because this would be recorded. So this is
Yeah,
you are welcome.
We always do that, and I'm wearing a branded golf shirt. So I can't outdress our and I never could anyway. Our kind guests for coming on the show. Real quick introduction. From you about the work that you do.
Sure. So I'm Gordon Domlija. I'm British, as some of your viewers and listeners will be able to tell from the accent. I stumbled into advertising and media some years ago after university in a broad attempt to find something that would fit my zero lack of any sort of vocational or useful practical degree, having done an arts degree. So I replied to a newspaper advert, little classified, in something called a Media Guardian, and which was a supplement back then, and got into this. And since then, I have been in advertising. A good grounding in Soho, London-based ad world for many years, and then moved to China in 2008, and basically made the whole Chinese economy skyrocket with what we did in advertising.
Excellent. Legendary intro. I love it. Tell me a little bit more, though. You said, and then ended up in China. Can I get some details on how that actually went down?
Yeah, of course. I mean, back in that day, 2008, I don't think there were many people who really thought about going to China. It was still quite a novel thing. Out of the blue, a headhunter contacted me. At the time, I was working for a independent communications agency, so really focused on startups, challenger brands. Trying to really make maximum impact with really tiny budgets against massive competitors. I was working in in things like the drinks industry, the male grooming industry, all of these startups, these owner entrepreneurs. So it was really exciting, and it was we were very early into the power of word of mouth and communication in that way to drive business, to drive brand noise in a world that was dominated by, TV and spending huge amounts of money on share and voice. So this is what I was doing, just creating impact for brands. And someone just called me and said, right, do you want to move to China? Because they're going through this massive growth stage. There's IP's the next big thing, branded content's the next big thing, UGC and word of mouth's the next big thing. They don't have people who do that. That's what you're doing here. Go to China. So, in those days, got me on a plane. There I am in business class, boom, and I don't know, that first point of landing in China, and you just the cities and the scale of it all. And this is before it really expanded even. And you land and go, this is the future. And I think it literally had me from the point I touched down in the airport, and it was just look, this is it. And there was something about it as well, because you remember 2008, it was just before the Beijing Olympics, the first one.
Yeah.
And there was just this real amazing sense that this was something was going to happen here, that something really, really amazing was going to happen here. And that's what took me there. I think that look-see, it was I never looked back. It was just this is definitely it. This is the future.
Yeah, I remember when I landed for the first time. I thought I really need to get into the crane business because that was all I saw. Either that or elevators. I feel like at some point, 80% of the world's elevators being installed were in China at some point. Yeah. And I think I'm not wrong. I heard something, some audacious number like that. But yeah, you're right. and as we always say on the show, the speed of business in China and the speed of growth and the speed of change and adoption and innovation, the whole thing. It's something that just has to be kind of almost boots on the ground to be understood,
Completely.
which is why we have this podcast talking to people like you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. China, September 2008, you joined Mindshare, right? So if you don't mind, paint for us a picture of what the marketing landscape was like. And if you can recall, the types of campaigns maybe that tend to be resonating with audiences back then. Yeah,
I think the key thing to remember is that you had this sort of like perfect storm of like an opening up of China, but also you had this mass demographic movement from like a very rural based like country and economy into a very urban one, and that happened at such a rapid pace. I mean, literally when I got there, like the majority of people in China were still living in what you'd call a rural environment, and the investment from the government, the investment from infrastructure, from companies, it was all directed at urbanization at this rapid pace, but also in terms of like driving people from what they'd see, what we'd see as poverty into a consumer middle class. And so suddenly you have at that time 300, 400, 500 million people being driven from like, a predominantly rural existence into a urban and consumer middle class existence. So on the one hand, when you're on the ground and you're there, you really feel the energy that provided, that anyone I encountered, and like anywhere, and not just Shanghai, but Shanghai is its own little bubble, as we all know, but everywhere, people felt like they were going somewhere. People felt like they could achieve, and people really thought like, I'm one step or one generation away from being incredibly rich, because the signs were all around them. There were people getting rich and everything. Exactly as you say, like, here's a guy who runs an elevator company. Suddenly, like, he has an order for like, 10 million elevators.
Yeah.
Right. You are going to get rich, right? There are, the guys producing like ring pulls on cans, the guy, all of these guys, suddenly there are millionaires and billionaires everywhere. And everyone feels that like, they're next in line for that. There is no reason why it can't happen to them. And I think there's a bit of a retrospective Chinese dream that has been sort of fitted to that, but you could feel it. The guy who's shining shoes, like, outside, like, he expects to be rich. He's not there. He's not a shoe shiner. He is like, someone who will be rich, like, at some point. But this is his, this is a journey he's on. So I think you can't underestimate that energy that was in China at that time. And it was really hard to articulate to people, but you go like, something's happening here, because everyone believes in it, especially coming from quite mature and you'd say, countries like, I came from the UK, and, social mobility is, while people talk about it, it wasn't really a thing. You're pretty much, there's very few people who move between like, who are able to just like leapfrog this. Even the people who are doing well, they all had some backing, or they all like, had something which was like, or knew somebody who could get them there. In China, it didn't feel like that, and at least that's the feeling. And that's the belief of the, like, everywhere I went, every country, every market, everywhere. So I think that's a really important thing to sort of like put into place, because without that context, it's really difficult to understand how the next 10, 15 years played out and why it played out like it did. So
good baseline.
So I mean, if I look back, it's a 2008 from a marketing perspective. On the one hand, it's a completely different world, just because of the technology. And the technology, it's quite difficult to put that aside, when you look at anything, because it has just dominated the way everything.
You got in front of me. I was my next question, and I will ask. I'm taking technology off the table. You can't use that. But yeah, go ahead.
I'll get back to that then. But literally, like if you think about it, it's a completely different world. 2008, from a marketing communications perspective, TV dominated. Okay, TV, like, this is how you communicated to people. Now, there is a reason for that. You're talking about 500 million people suddenly having access to TVs. They suddenly had fridges. Now, you imagine, but this is it seems sort of like strange to us, like, because these are things that we've lived with for many years. But suddenly, like, if you say 500 million people now have a fridge, what possibilities does that open up in terms of products? in terms of accessibility of what you can use, what you can consume. And then if you add like, the supply of those products into that, because suddenly people can consume that, suddenly like, the world's opened up to so many people. So then what does television become? Television becomes that sort of thing in the home that tells you about all of these products. So you have this, opportunity to communicate with hundreds and hundreds of, I mean, the scale is just unfathomable, really. Like, and you have a medium which is doing that. When I was there, like at that stage, TV probably took 78% of the paid media budget. That's incredible, wow. Right? Across like, thousands of like, channels across the different layers of national, provincial, regional, local, all playing their part, but essentially all doing the same thing, delivering that message into people's homes. And, right. And that was the primary means because, at that time, and we'll probably come on to this, like, because strangely not a lot has changed other than the technology. But at that time, the most important thing was to get your brand name known. And that was true whether you're an international brand or whether you're a domestic brand. What you need to do is just people know your name, because invariably people would try it. Yeah? You didn't have to try much harder than like get your name out there. So you had, marketing was focused on incredible amounts of repetition. And by repetition, I mean, even in the communication, just say the brand name. There was a template. Say the brand name, like, 5 seconds in. If you haven't said the brand name and it hasn't flashed up on the screen with a logo, it's like you're lost already. So just flash it up. Tell them over and over again about the brand. And, make sure you do that every ad break. And that is how you got into people's homes. That's how you got into people's mind because, only takes a fraction of that 500 million people to, I'll just try that. Wow, you're hitting everything already. I mean, like, in many ways, going, yeah, we did such a great job. We sold so much. I mean, you would have struggled back then not to do a good job, right? You would have struggled not to sell any product because people were inquisitive because suddenly the world has opened up to them. They have access to a product they never had. They're going to try it. It might not, it might be rubbish. It might never, it might never take, but you've got trial. And when you talk about scale of that size, trial's the only thing you need at that stage because you've just got so many consumers coming into the market that's okay. Even if the brand promise isn't fulfilled, or even if there isn't a brand promise, you're still, you're still getting into people's homes. You're getting into people's baskets. People are purchasing, and that was true whether you're a toothpaste, whether you're a car, whether you're a mobile handset, whatever it is. It's just like, make sure people are aware of who you are, because there is a chance that there will be a trial. And I think that was, very, very much how the marketing landscape looked like. Presence and consistency and like just being there was so much more important than either having a story, having a brand, having a purpose, all of these things that, a lot of us take for granted when we've worked in a marketing and branding and communications like that. It's sort of like, that's not so important. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. And if you're present, there is a very good chance that sticks in people's minds. I mean, some of the most annoying ads in the world were created there, and that's just how it was done because that's stuck. People, didn't have a sophistication. I mean, I remember having conversations with like Unilever marketing leads at that time where we were trying to encourage them to use digital. I mean, can you imagine? This is 2008. This isn't like
trying.
This isn't that
trying to encourage.
We should have some We should have some digital on our plan, and their response would be, "But then that would decrease my share of voice on TV. If I decrease my effective voice on TV by putting money here, like what's the impact on our brand?" And at that stage, measurement and attribution was still pretty difficult on that. So say, well, so I'm taking something away that I know. And these are conversations happening in every boardroom, in every marketing meeting. I take that away. What does it actually give me? My competitors aren't doing that. And and you're sort of going, but I want to do something really exciting and innovative. And this is the future. And going like, might be the future, but I need to sell now. If I reduce my share of voice, there is a very clear correlation that my share of voice is equivalent to my share of market. I reduce that comes down as well. Then what happens? Then we start spiraling, and that wasn't how they looked at it. And it is quite interesting. I think the parallels we still see with marketing in China, as in it's still incredibly short term like that. And you still have to convince about what will any change that I make to a plan, any deviation, what is that going to look like in terms of what it does for my business in the immediate term, not just in the future term.
Well, That's really interesting. And let me see if I can unpack what I'm thinking to try to ask, because, next up, I want to talk to you about the evolution of effective marketing over the last 15 years. And then, like I said, taking, technology off the table. But maybe there's something interesting here based on what you were saying, where you and I were talking about corporate and being a corporate. And I don't think necessarily, if you love taking risks, you don't spend your life in corporate, right? The two are somewhat antithetical in a way, and I'm trying not to offend too many people, but in a way. So, I mean, potentially is the work. I mean, it's surprising to hear that it is still difficult to convince people to get off the plan, to get maybe outside of, this has always worked, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Versus if we don't try, if we don't innovate, if we're not taking risks, we will get left behind at some point by somebody else, maybe not the competitors to the left and right of us, but if we look down, there's people coming up, and they're the ones that are the biggest threat. Talk to me a little bit, you don't have to use what I just said, but that change in effective marketing over 15 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a really interesting subject matter here, because if you look at then, not taking technology off the table yet, sorry, but if you look at the job that TV ads used to do, drive higher awareness, prompt and action. Actually, TV was it was pretty much direct response if you go back to that time, because I understand this, I then go and there's a direct response and I'll go and purchase this, or or at least consider purchasing it. So, that's how that worked. But that moved from TV very quickly. It then moved to online video platforms. So suddenly you have online video platforms. So that took the place of a lot of TV. Then you move into celebrity endorsers. Okay, so then suddenly you have these celebrity endorsers. They are playing that role that TV played. Then you move to e-commerce, social commerce platforms. You move to influencers, and then you move to probably unsustainable mass discounting and incentivization, right? Which is what a lot of companies have done to gain traction and whatever else. And that is, and that's still the case. Then you go to in-game advertising, following audiences. Where are people spending their time? Where can I actually meet these masses of people? Then you move to, the metaverse, right? You're not moving there because you feel it is, because it's the platform that's innovative, is what I'd say. The communication itself isn't. If you see what influencers are saying, if you see what we're doing in game, if you're seeing that again, how's that necessarily different to what we did in magazines 50 years ago? Contextualizing advertising around a space where people find interest, right? Here's an ad which is which is adjacent or literal within that category or industry, and it sort of sits there. It's not so different, right? But it's only the technology and the delivery that has changed. Now, advertisers brands are often very, very reactive. They see upstarts and that's why, I still get a lot of energy talking to startups, talking about the difference between, talking in the corporate world and the startup and the VC world. Once you start to get that, because they're so passionate about their product. Yeah. Not the corporate aren't, but they're passionate about the product. They're passionate about and they don't have the bucks to go and compete in every platform in every way. So going, right. So how do I do this? How do I gain fame, notoriety, traction, with an audience? And so, that's why, particularly in China, you'll go, oh, wow, well, how did Meituan do that? Or how did Perfect Diary do that? Or how did how did Luckin do this? Because, I remember working for L'Oreal in China, and exactly to your point, we're there going I'm looking at competitive data within that industry. And there are companies taking market share, not massive, but here's 1% here, or 1.5% there, or 0.8% there. They're taking chunks out of market share. They've got no measurable advertising spend, no measurable marketing spend. Going, right, well, how do they do that? How are these companies doing that? And that's where suddenly the reaction comes, going, right, we need to stay ahead of this. We need to stay ahead of these trends. Not because, that 0.8 is going to make a massive difference. But if you have all of those and they're all like, doing something to target a specific niche of your customer audience, when you're a massive brand, like, you're going to get picked off, right? You the only place you go is downwards. Yeah, I've got like 30% market share. Right. Well, you're going to get picked off here, and you're not even going to know they're doing it, because they'll have localized distribution, or they'll have D2C. They'll have something which is like totally like, alien to the way that you've constructed your business and your route to market. Right. Mm-hmm. And that is how, and that is how those brands have grown. Now, there's a whole nother conversation about, right, they can get to a certain stage then, because then what's their end goal? What is like, what are they trying to achieve through that? And I think this would probably be very interesting to a lot of the, the brands and the investors who listen and subscribe to you, because you've got to know what does that success look like? And for a lot of those, it's like, right, I get to a certain stage, I get a load of funding, then going, right, well, where do I go from here? Like, if you look at what happened to Perfect Diary, going like, great, we've got all these users, like, and they're, going, now I'm going to sell them some really premium product. Going, no, you're not. Because those customers that you have and where you've got to, they are not interested in that. They have joined you for this. You have hit your niche, and maybe you've hit your ceiling on this, at that time. So how do you reinvent this? How do you actually turn into like, whether it's a purposeful or it's a or a more premium product? That's a big ask, because actually your success has come somewhere else, and someone else can take that space very, very quickly, right? And suddenly you've got like a load of funding, you've got a load of investors going, right, where's my returns? What's the next stage of growth? And you're going like, well, we might have just plateaued. And like, that's not what you want to hear. But I think that to me is like, also understanding that like, there are limitations in terms of some of these marketing strategies, because you're still very much then focused on what is a niche audience in the scale market. So it's really interesting, like, it's a really interesting subject matter, I think. And then you see that, like, the brands, brands that succeed, particularly in China, you still need scale. You can't even make a dent if you don't have scale. So even though, I've made it sound really sort of like glib that nothing has changed, over 15 years, but the emphasis is still on like delivering scale. Why are you in game? Because there's like 500 million gamers in China, and they're in that space. You have to communicate with them. Why are you on like, why are you on these platforms? Why are you on the social commerce platforms? Because this is where people spend their time. This is like, this is 50% of their daily online time is spent on these channels. You have to be in there in some way. Sometimes you don't control it particularly, but sometimes, you have to allow your brand to live in these spaces, or you become not relevant. If you are not relevant, that is, then you're on a very short shelf life, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think the question should ever be, why should we be there? The question should be, why are they there? And understand that better. Because like you said, with Perfect Diary, we may know they're there, but that's not enough. Because if we know they're there and we go there and we're not successful, we're not going to be successful, because we didn't take the next step to understand why they were there and meet them at that point of interest or incentive, and why, and their why of being there, and did it match up with us being there? Because like you said, if we try to sell them goods or services or something while they're there, but that's not why they're there, and they're specifically there almost antithetical to being sold something while they're there, that was their safe space, and now you've entered it, well, we're back.
Ooh. Okay, we're back. Yeah. So I think there was a nice little cut off, and then it was like the thing with Perfect Diary, I think is where I started losing you.
Yeah, and it's great because I was just rambling anyway. I was on my own track there, so it doesn't even matter. But I just think there's an interesting nuance there around what you said, even just teasing out that Perfect Diary moment of the conversation of like, just even knowing, first of all, we go where our customers are, right? And we shouldn't really question that. Oh, but we should, because now we need to know why they're there, and would they welcome us to join them? because sometimes they wouldn't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, just because you can doesn't mean you should is the thing. And therefore, and that's why we are having conversations about the different technologies in play now. How do people want to see your washing powder here? Are they interested in like, is this what they're thinking about at this stage? And, and while, people want to talk about that. And I think that's the thing with marketers as well. Not all of them, but, they're very focused on what's new. And what's this? Not necessarily what's right. Do you have a product that fits for this? Because again, if you go into like a meeting with like, marketing, they want to do something new. They want to do something innovative. Like, they're going like, tell me about NFTs. Tell me about the metaverse. I want a virtual influencer. I want this. Going, okay, but if you're selling a washing powder, like what role does it play in this communication? How does it help you other than it's something that you want to do and you're driving this tactic, which is a tactic. It's not, as part of your communication plan. This is, it's for you. It's not necessarily for the brand. And like, and I think a lot of people get caught up in that because you have to have that, and it's like going, right, I've had dictates, from global, companies, won't say who, but they say, right, we've got to deliver, 80% of our marketing communication has got to be delivered programmatically or like in precision. And say, okay, well, that's great, but why? Why would you do that? And in some markets, you understand, like, how diverse this region is, and going like, yeah, so this is what we need to do, and like, and it's just, non-negotiable. Okay, great. Then you go to a market like Thailand, you go, right, okay, how much of your sales are through e-commerce? You'd say 0.6%. Well, okay, fantastic. How much are through bricks and mortar? The rest of it. Great. Okay. And like, where do people get their information from? TV. So still TV, right? It's going, okay, so while this is great, why would I need to restructure, my entire team and like your entire delivery system to something which may pay dividends in the future? But in the short term, and this is me, like, as someone supporting, rather than the brand owner telling me, like, that we're short term. I'm going, you've got to balance it, and sometimes, and that's the role we have to play. Saying like, look, yeah, that's a great ambition, but there are stages to get in there, and like, global dictates do not make that happen. Why are we in that space? What do we hope to achieve in that space? How does it fit into the holistic thing that we're doing? Is it the right thing for us? And is the timing right? In terms of level of maturity of our brand, of our customers, and of the market itself. If you can't fulfill and you can't, like, some markets are just not set up. Like, if like, in Thailand, it's still a predominantly rural country. Going like, right, so there becomes infrastructure and logistical issues to being able to do that, even if like the will is there, and like, and so I think that to me is, in everything that we look at, in all the ways that marketing communications have changed, it's still the same. What role does it play? Where is like, and you can't look at this, and in China it will be very different to other markets because the level of maturity, because the level of sophistication, because of the way that consumers behave and expect to take in information and how they then act on it. It's completely different. There are different stages of development, and therefore, you have to think about that. And that's true whether you're looking at different markets in Asia, whether you're looking at China, or even within China. There's still some element of that. You're saying, right, well, what's your delivery system? What platforms do people want to use in these markets? And like, what products are they comfortable talking to an AI generated, like, chatbot, and which ones, really require human support and help? It's going to be very different if you're in the mum and baby space than you're in the mobile phone, like, gaming technology space, right? And yet I think, and this is the sort of like funny thing for me, when you see the output plans, particularly in China, because everything becomes very tactical very quickly, plans look the same. Marketing calendars look pretty much the same. Here's what we're doing on this. Here's what we're doing on this. Here's our metaverse play. And like the platforms all look the same. The outputs technically look the same. I'm like, right, well, and that's quite interesting because so much, and I think in this, rambling through, going back to my original point about like, there is, an argument to be made that not much has actually moved on. The platforms and like listing has changed. It's not CCTV anymore, but here's what I'm doing on Tencent. Here's what I'm doing on Ali. Here's what I'm doing this. These are That's what the plan looks like. And that looks the same, as I say, if you're a washing pad or if you're a car, if you're like a mobile phone handset. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that you got to break through. That is, then that is when you get to, right, well, how much of this is effective? How much of this do I really know is what I need to be doing for the brand? How does this relate to my strategy? How does this relate to my plan for this brand? No, not just for this campaign, but going forward and the expectations that I have for what, this brand will do in this country.
Right. So trying to get somebody to scan a QR code in print, you may not be able to replicate that well on a highway billboard.
Right.
Unless you're a car insurance company, and then I find that to be actually hilarious. Because
of course.
And this QR code for 50% off the next 6 months in car insurance. And I feel like that would be a hilarious billboard if people actually could get the tongue-in-cheek humor in that. Because you don't want people using that. Tell us if it's not too confidential or asking too much, and you can decide how much of the intuition and strategy and brilliance that you want to share. But some of your favorite campaigns in Greater China that you've been involved with, and what made them so special or effective for what you guys were doing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate, having worked for some, really huge agencies, that I've worked for some really exciting and innovative brands in China. And I think, I really I lucked out a little bit. I mean, for us in this industry, the things that you remember aren't always the things that make loads of money. They're the things that really that you think have changed things in society, have done things which are innovative, which are useful, which are which you see as adding to society and community. Not here I am with my great big vision and and necessity to do good. But if you look at someone like Nike, okay, so I had the great pleasure of working with Nike for many years in China. Now, and the sweet spot for me was between about 2010 and 2012, 2013, where we just had a number of campaigns, including something that we called Festival of Sport in 2011. Now, this is a series of truly sort of experiential campaigns, where the engagement of the audience, getting people to participate, and creating Nike's position as the leader of participation sports, not a retailer, not someone who sells you shoes, not someone who sells you apparel, but someone who encourages you to participate and be the best you that you can be. Everyone's an athlete, right? This is how we approach everything. Now, I think, that coming with that sort of purpose, creating these events where people came, participated, engaged with coaches, engaged with peers, engaged with people, to play sport. At a time when online gaming was really taking off, and there was a real concern about, how the country was going in terms of obesity, in terms of you'll remember there was quite a few scares, a lot of the big Western brands coming in, fast food, and and that became the new norm, right? I mean, they were everywhere, in China at that time. And it's and Nike's play on this was come participate, be an athlete, be with people. And I think that to me, really sort of starting out with a inclusivity of everyone, being able to participate, of drawing people into that, where participation was the objective rather than sales, and the focus on that. What are we doing to get people to participate, to be part of this? Of course, sales are important. Of course, business is important, but that wasn't what we went into those campaigns doing. It was how do we get people to take part? And I think to me that was really special. And just seeing how many people engaged all across the country, how many events took place. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of events. That to me is a really special feeling, going and being part of that. I think when you're a real sort of hands-on on the ground person, you just love being involved in those sort of things and seeing people participating, enjoying, and going, right, I've done my job here. That's really, and that to me was really special. I think the other really sort of big game changer that I remember was I worked with Land Rover for many years in China. When we launched the Evoque here, so it was at 2011, 2012, just being able to tap into different insights around China, around who these consumers are. I mean, a Land Rover customer and driver in China is about 35 years younger than it is anywhere else in the world, right? It's like that was so typical of everything, like going, oh, here's our talking audience, car ads, like, designed by, by committee in China. It would traditionally have incredibly wealthy, successful man, sitting in the back of a long wheelbase saloon, highly attractive partner, wife, I don't know, maybe, and that car would then like chauffeur them to their private jets, to their stables and polo country club, to their, to the opera, because that's what people did, right? That was what a car advert looked like.
The Evoque was, wasn't that Land Rover's or Range Rover's Land Rover attempt to come in at a slightly lower price point? It was a bit of a smaller,
Yeah, exactly. Smaller car, like, self-drive, fun, enthusiasm. I mean, and rather than launch in that way, it was like, we launched with a generated, like, specific IP anime series. So we built an anime series to sell the car, which had like huge elements of UGC in it. People continued the story, like, kind of like, how's this work for because even like, with a lower price point, you're still talking like 400, 500,000 RMB. I mean, that's like, $80,000, $90,000. This is not a low price point car, China. But those were the consumers. We were anticipating them to be like, at that age group. Here are people like, probably first, second generation wealth. Got money. They've got money to spend. They want something like, how do you actually connect with these people in areas that they want to be connected with? They're not going to polo. They're not sitting in the back of that saloon. Like, those aren't their trappings. Those aren't, their cues. And so this really sort of shifted it. And I think it was just so, refreshing. And I think that's why those things stick in mind, because they're so different to what was happening. And like, you can do that as a big brand. You can do that if you have like the courage of that and say, right, have I actually got an insight that is gonna work for this? Do I know my audience well enough? Is that audience big enough to drive, the scale and the size of like performance that I want for this business? If it is, then like, then there's plenty of people brave enough to go out and get it. And I think that to me was a really, brilliant example about how to launch something so completely differently. How to think about things, but based on an insight, based on a strategy, based on like understanding, like, what your customers are interested in, where they're going to, and what will drive them to think about that vehicle in a different way to what is sitting there in the market. Yeah, I think I just want to mention one more, because one of the things that we did in China, like very deliberately, I pivoted the business I was running to focus on tech companies, Chinese up and coming tech companies. So in 2015. We became the first agency for Meituan, or Meituan Dianping as it was back then. So this is like a, for people sitting in the US, more like a Groupon company. I think it started as like, a group buy, discount, like vouchering, whatever else, and and particularly in the area of food delivery. Which is obviously ubiquitous now, but back then that wasn't so much of a thing, right? It was a very different environment. So, at that time, they'd never had an agency. They had like, 2 million like customers a day, like having food delivery. And what I loved about it, and this is a bit more sort of like geeky, like, data driven rather than sort of like inspiration driven, but it's like what they told us. It's like, right, look, we're going to IPO in 3 years. Okay. That's the plan. Like, very single-minded ambition. Right? We want to make a load of money on this. You get us there. How do you help us get us there? Right? In those 3 years, we drove their daily orders from 2 million to over 20 million a day. Okay? Now, we did that. How? Like, understanding the data. Understanding that, like, you have to win every day. The competition is super fierce. There were loads of like companies all trying to do the same thing now, right? So how do you do this faster than anyone else? How do you do it better than anyone else? So like, what we were using, I mean, it was the first campaign where we really used thousands and thousands of different pieces of copy and creative, which we could alter every day based on weather, based on like, environment, based on pollution, based on like, and this, like, this whole body of work, we could target not just like on a city basis, not just on an area basis, but on a building basis. Like, right, this building here, this is like, we're going to win in this building today. Yeah, we're going to be Erlenmeyer today in this building. This is like, so we're going to target it, like, as people come in on the metro, we're going to target in the office LCDs. We're going to smash it. Like, we know what the weather's going to be like. We're going to tell them this is what they should be ordering. They're already ordering their lunch as they're going up in the lift. And it was just incredible what we were able to do with that, with the data that they had to be able to target in that way. But again, very single-minded. Like, it's like, you'd be there going, what a result. We raised 4 million new customers. And the brand leaders there would be going, yeah, that was yesterday, Gordon. What have you done for me today? And and it's that mentality. And that stuck with me more than anything about how business is done in China. Going, yeah, that's great. Well done. That was yesterday. Yeah. Today, what have you done for me? What are you doing? And that, and taking that mentality into how you do business there. Like, if you don't have that, no one looks back and goes, yay, look at how fantastic what I just did was. It's like going, great. Like, that's got you to this point. Right? Now get to the next point because, I've got to get there in by 2018. Now, that's, I think, where a lot of businesses and startups struggle a little bit because I don't know if they have that singularity of mindset about this is what we need to do. So I need to hit every one of these, I need to jump every one of these hurdles on the way to get there. Yeah. If I need to get to IPO, this is like the minimum level of customers I have to have. This is how many people need to be active users every day. This is how many things I've got to sell every day. So to me, that was, that really, and that's something you can take into any business. It's going great. Let's all pat ourselves on the back, but let's do what today's work is. And what's, so I really, really enjoyed that. As I say, that's very much a more sort of like geeky data driven one, but it really shows you, and I hope it explains to people how business was done there and how those successful companies, they went to a $7 billion IPO. This is not bad going, right? So it's, those are the things that happens, but that is how they happen. It's like, that is the work that goes into making them happen.
Yeah. So you had me chuckle when you mentioned Erlenmeyer because I haven't heard of it. I know what it is. I just haven't heard it mentioned and I'd forgotten about it. And just the name makes me chuckle. Like I literally, I now am envisioning, I want to start a company here. Cause for those who don't know what Erlenmeyer translates to, it just means hungry with a question, like that's the ma, it's the question mark. So hungry? And I'm like, I'm just seeing myself on a billboard or something, just like all small letters, hungry, question mark. That's our company. What's your company name? Right. Hungry? But with the inflection to indicate it's a question. Oh man, that's so funny. It just makes me laugh every time I hear, cause you can do that. Erlenmeyer. Chafama. But
a
buddy of mine started a company called Juan Mifan. Yeah. Juan Mifan, bowl of rice, it's just like, oh, so funny. But yes, you could. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask, because you mentioned it, you were talking a little bit about like wealth of consumers. So what I found interesting, and I'm not sure I would know how this broke down in marketing to this class, this younger class, where in every scope, because you said anime, right? So these guys are playing League of Legends, or they're playing Call of Duty, or they're playing online games, or they're whatever. From most indications, even from what they wear, mostly, if it's not God, but they seem like regular young people until you look at their bank account. So in every way, they're just like you and me. And then they've got 1 billion times more money than we do. It's, so how does that, did that ever factor into how you did marketing?
I mean,
did they just think the same? So it was the same? They just had more money?
I mean, to some degree, yes. I mean, I mean, the one thing, like in China, I was always the poorest man in a room in every focus group, right?
Gosh.
I mean,
totally.
Like, wow. Yeah. But this is, because it does, because it actually affects everything from the marketing to, just the practical things about how people buy money. I mean, like, when we were, the first days on Land Rover. I'd go to the showrooms, whatever. And I remember one day I was there, and someone just came in, just like going, "What's the most expensive car you got?" That one. Going, "Right, I'll have it." And like didn't look like anything, just like he comes in, and then a bunch of his helpers come in carrying like Louis Vuitton bags, just stuffed with cash. And the highest denomination you have is like 100 RMB. So what's that, like $14, whatever, right? Yeah. And you know how much that car was? 1.7 million RMB. So like the way they're set up in the showrooms even, and like it looks like a bank. Because essentially you've just got like dozens of bank tellers just going as the money rolls out. That's how people buy. So you want to make that experience a good one, right? So you actually build out your infrastructure there, because people are going to spend time there. People they spend more time waiting for the money to be counted than choosing the car. So I just want that one. Yeah, that's it. So it does plan it, going like these people pay for stuff in cash. I mean, not so much anymore. There's obviously a lot of restrictions on that sort of thing. But that is how it was. Yeah. That was how it was done, and that was completely normal. That's why you have the bank tellers, you have the system.
True.
But even in terms of marketing, of course, because while this is still very new money, so the level of and this isn't derogatory in any way, but the level of sophistication in anything isn't it's not as we would expect. Like, you only have to, and now as travel's opened up again, the boutiques in Paris, it's like the customers that come from China, like, and trust me, they are the ones who are going to be spending the money and buying everything in that shop. But, their behaviors, their way of like, they're not used to, behaving that way. They'll just go and go, well, I want one of everything. And you're sort of going, wow, like, this is that
was easy.
So it's, yeah, right. But yeah, it was, but that still happens, and like that would, and that will keep happening because people have money, or they've had like new money. And now even with the pent up sort of like, frustration of not being able to spend, but you wouldn't guess that from seeing the queues outside, like, the luxury fashion houses in all across China. People are spending money, but that's how they spend it. They spend it in a very different way. So again, the communication that you see for brands, even very traditional, very what you would say are, highly controlled around brand image. You don't get more highly controlled than like, a Louis Vuitton or a Chanel.
Right.
But how they communicate in China, or the allowance they give to people about how they use that brand in China, in social platforms, in commerce platforms, around how they talk about it peer to peer, you've got to let that go. You've got to like release some of your controlling instincts, because these are the people, how they use it is not how you tell them to use it. Even like, in terms of communications, like, we mentioned that about, the average age of a Land Rover buyer, but, the same's true of any luxury product. Like I was taking my daughter to school. There are 7-year-olds with Chanel handbags. I mean, like, this is not a normal environment, right? This is
no.
So, how, the idea that like, luxury handbags or luxury watches or these things are something at the pinnacle of your career. When you've achieved everything you want to achieve, you reward yourself, and there's self-reward. Absolutely not the case. Why do I wait like, for 50 years to reward myself? I'll reward myself now. I'm going to go in there and like, I've wanted to, and that's how it works. And I think that's a very, very different mindset for a lot of people to get into until you see it, until you see how they consume. It's luxury retail is no different, in many ways to like, shopping at the supermarket. Because you're not, a lot of these people, they don't make a choice between these things going, well, that might be the one I buy today. I will still come back and get that one tomorrow. It's not like I've got this one and that's my lifelong purchase, like, my lifelong Hermes purchase. It's not, because most of these people can buy another one tomorrow if they want to, So it does change how you communicate, or the level of control and the level of, discretion you give to people in terms of how they perceive the brand, how they want to talk about the brand, how they use the brand. That is a very different thing, I think, to how we've traditionally marketed and segmented our audiences in the West.
I got another fun one for you. Thinking about technology. So this time we get to lean in on technology. And, 2007, the iPhone comes out, right? And this is now the start of the wave of 1 billion people in one country getting access to the internet. So now we can go to third, fourth, fifth, sixth tier cities. Okay. So I'm curious what that looked like when that just washed over, and how that affected or impacted you. And did you have to adjust or even create new types of marketing or messaging, or empathy for consumer classes if you were going from tier one and then this is what we're going to do for tier 4, tier 5? My assumption, naively, probably so, is that it has to be different, right? Like, this is a completely different type of person, right? Or am I wrong? Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you're right and wrong. How about that? It's like,
I'll take it.
But because even within, those cities, you still have, layers of sophistication. You still, in the same way you do with Shanghai, so the complexity isn't just like, oh, homogeneously everyone in Shanghai behaves like this and everyone in in whatever Xinjiang behaves like this. It's like, you can't do that. It's not really there is no standard behavior. I think, so for us, it's always going to be a case of, there are like-minded people. So for some products, if you're let's take imported milk formula or something like that, right? So what is actually going to drive a consumer to do that? You say, all right, well, there might be a bigger concentration in scale in tier 1 cities because they have more access, because they've had more, visibility to foreign brands. They're much more used to seeing them, and they maybe have developed a different level of trust because they've been using them in other walks of life throughout their sort of development as a consumer, right? But that's not to say there aren't people who in, tier 4, 5, 6 cities who say, well, actually, I don't trust this, this provider, I believe that this has better, nutritional or developmental elements to it because of the technology that's placed, or I have a certain disposition to, German brands over this. So those people exist. You can still find those. And this is why, the precise targeting that we have, in terms of being able to identify customers, it's a lot less blunt than saying, look, third tier people behave like this, because a lot of those third tier people actually aspire to be first tier people. And they want to be first in that environment. So you can't discount all of that. Now, is it, economically and financially viable to target there, or do you concentrate there? Those are the questions that you have. And that is why you build out your marketing plan and say, right, where are these audiences? Because while we've done a great job in terms of developing personalization at scale, he says, and I'm still going to do that. It's still a tactic, yeah. And if you're a mass brand in China wanting to achieve mass things, that is a tactic to convert. It's not necessarily this is that's my strategy. It has to be part of what your strategic outlook is. What's your plan to get to that? Yeah, there's going to be some people and I can identify those all over the country, and they're going to be everywhere, right? And we can't just think, oh, they're just going to sit in these 3 cities because everyone else is a complete alien. It's not the case. But now we have the tools and sophistication to be able to find them. But that's more of the conversion stage. Where is the mass audience? Where is mass communication? And where is those are still factors that need to be played. And some things are going to be much more, much more focused on certain tiers than others. Now, the thing to overlay on it, and probably the most important thing, is actually your distribution and availability. Now, while a lot of things have been democratized, I would say, by building, at the time that people got those phones, at the time that people got internet access, you also had the rise of platforms and logistics. You had Taobao, which is cheap and everything. You had, Jingdong, which is actually, I can get it to you within whatever, a day, wherever you are. You remember those adverts, those people on zip lines, going into into rural jungles and and this is how they do it, within one day. So there were companies built up. So logistics suddenly, made everything more possible, right? So, I remember this probably about 2010, Gap, when they entered, they didn't want to go on the platforms, because it was still a little bit Wild West. Like, when you looked at Taobao, I mean, there was no brand protection, right? But so a lot of companies wanted to build up their own e-commerce sites, and they only had like maybe 5-6 stores, between like Beijing and Shanghai, and within like a week of opening their online store, they'd sold in every province in China, in every major city. Suddenly it's like, wow, that's opened up a lot of doors, right? And that's just one example of that being able to happen, because like suddenly the logistics were there, the availability was there, the accessibility through people's like mobile phone handsets was there. And when that all combines, suddenly opens up a lot of different areas. So like, and I think that's, that's talking about 10, 12 years ago. Now, like, the situation is so many people consume in so many ways. There's so much data about this that you can find all of these people, or people like these people, everywhere. And I think, that has changed, not just in terms of like the tactics part, but for me, the more important thing is the insights about like, you can't look at things as homogeneously as we have done in the past, and just like, bucket this and bucket that. And like, and actually you're going, right, this is much more interesting in terms of an insight as to who these people are. Which gives you directions as to who you should be talking to and who you should be targeting, and what your communication should look like, because these are the things they are looking for from your product. So it's the insight part rather than the conversion part, which me as a marketer, I would find much more interesting. Yeah, you're always going to sell stuff, and there's always conversion. But to me, how do you use that insight? How do you use like what the information you're getting to really understand your customers, what they're interested in, and therefore what your product development should look like, and what your communication should look like? What's actually driving that?
Yeah, reminds me, I was going to even say after the last part that we were talking about, used to work with one of the top online men's magazine, eZine, in China. And these guys were rabid. They had a war room where they had all their articles and they had everything up there. And they were by the hour measuring consumption and hit rates and open rates and read throughs and percentage of, whatever. And if they had all their markers, and if something wasn't converting at the rate that it needed to convert within 2 hours, depending, like they had different timelines for different times of the day when things were posted. And if it didn't convert on the numbers that they needed to convert at, they changed the graphic. And then they waited, and then they changed the title, and then they rewrote the first paragraph, right? And then it was gone. And within one day, something could have been totally produced end to end, and it was up and it was gone because it didn't convert. You're gone. You're out. Like, yeah, that was it. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's
super
fast. But even some of the really big brands. I mean, like I remember, even before the e-commerce boom, working with L'Oreal, and it was like, they would know, if they launched a Maybelline lipstick, if that hadn't like hit a certain sales target by within 3 to 5 days, it was that responsive advertising that, and that was even with TV, it was that responsive. Yeah, and that's still, China is still a market of responsiveness. And that's why we keep going, man. And that's why we, I always end up in conversations with, what's the balance between brand and and performance? And there isn't one. It's about performance, because this is still an incredibly responsive market. It's like, and therefore, if something's working or not, very quickly. And that's what your metrics look like. So they'd say, well, they'd pull that campaign within 5 days. That's like a TV campaign. You're going wow, that this isn't working because you're not getting the footfall to the stores to buy that specific product.
What was
now,
that?
Can you imagine that was like Maybelline, L'Oreal products, like a lipstick or eyeliner. That's how responsive that was. And this is going back again, 10, 15 years. That's, that was what Chinese consumption looked like. Yeah. If things had been seen and there was no action on it, in certain categories, whether it's working or not, you pull that, you go to the next one. And now it's like, that was 3 to 5 days. Now you can tell, it's like minutes, whether this is whether this is working or not. And that's how a lot of companies operate. I mean, it becomes incredibly obsessive though, right? I mean,
yes.
Exactly to your example, I've worked with people who are like brand owners, marketing and CEOs who I know outside of work, and they'll literally just sit there, like, on weekends and just looking at trackers on their phones, like going, oh, God. Then like head office, oh, like something's happened, like, like we're tracking 2% down, like, and it's like, and it's Saturday afternoon, we're at a barbecue, like, surely, like, it will still be there, like, after your burger, right? But
Yeah.
that it becomes incredibly obsessive, and a lot of China in terms of marketing and how it works, so focused on the result, so focused on that, like, on being able to deliver like that. And it's, I mean, it's good, but it's bad, right? And it's and that's why the reputation of a lot of companies in terms of China, in terms of how work is conducted, how hard work is. I mean, unless you've worked in China, it's very hard to understand just how intense it really is. I mean, it
Hence
really,
the podcast.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence having like people like you on here. I want to double down on that in a way. One of the things was I wanted to kind of say, how hard is it to have a conversation as you're, bringing in a new brand, saying, what's your big plan? No big plan. We're going to try this and we're going to try that. We're going to try that. And if it doesn't work, we're going to change these few things. And if those don't work, we're going to change these few things. And then if it doesn't work, we're just going to scrap it. And then okay, well then wouldn't that have just been a massive waste of money? And then you're going to be like, well, no, but the data that we would have gathered and the learning and the insights is immeasurably, that's priceless, and that's going to factor into the next stage. But I can't imagine how hard that must be for some people coming in to that area of the world to try to hear somebody like you. And I know I put a ton of words in your mouth that you probably never said in your life, but to have them, to be approached with that type of this is our strategy, and they're thinking that's no strategy at all. That's just suicide. Why would how does that go?
I mean, it's funny because it happens to some of the biggest companies in the world. I mean, we were Amazon's agency in China, like for when they launched the e-commerce, and even there, I remember us having these conversations, going, but what's the differentiation? What are we bringing to the table that the current e-commerce platforms don't? We're slower, we're more expensive, like we have less variety. We're like but that was the case. It's going, okay, well, right. but they're not the only company. I'm just saying it because I remember working on it and just going, right, we're trying to find a niche. Yeah, you're never going to be like that player against those players. Like anything, knowing your competition and knowing where your areas to play. Now, there are many reasons, and Amazon probably learned a lot more about this market than they ever let on to me, and that's totally fine. But that to me was an example of like, well, what's that position? You're going to sell niche ski wear from legitimized from that comes in directly from Amazon Japan. Going, that's great. But that's, I mean, of the market, what is that? This is, if that's your ambition and that's what your play is here, that's fine. But that's not an Amazon play, right? I wouldn't have thought, not in that space. So that's probably, it's an expensive business they've done. It's expensive, test, but people have had to do that. And as I say, they're not the first or last, certainly from the big sort of like Western technology companies to have suffered the same fate in China, right? So, but I think it is an increasingly challenging place to do business for many brands, for brands entering. I think you've got to do your work up front, and I think for me this is, you can't dip your toe in and try. Right? You have to talk to, and I think, and this is why, it's so valuable, podcasts like this and people who have had that experience. So and if you don't go in there with a strategy, and China might not seem like a strategy sort of place, but my goodness, you need to have one. It's like, if you want to survive, and you have to talk to people who have actually on the ground done this. And by that means connected every dot, connected, you could have the best product in the world. It could be stunning and perfect and everything else, but if you can't navigate how to actually take that to market, how to how to communicate it, where it goes, what platforms it sits on, what your competition is going to do to you when this comes out, you can't predict the future. Yeah, absolutely impossible. And that's true everywhere, by the way, but in China particularly so, because you can have a curveball thrown at you by the government, and next day everything has changed. Everything. If you don't have a contingency for that, if you haven't thought about this, if you you are doomed, right? And it is not a cheap place to come and dip your toe in. not a cheap place. You
No.
can lose a lot of money very, very quickly. And so therefore, like, our biggest advice always, like, get good advice, get a range of advice, because even when you're talking to, consultants from outside, a lot of them don't have on the ground experience in China. A lot of the senior people, they've never worked in China, right? They can tell you stuff that they've read in reports, but and in actual physical doing business. And even the companies that are here, you've got to remember, I mean, like, I've built agencies and like very successful businesses there, but we're also a business, right? The advice you get from agencies is like, it's to drive their business as much as it is to drive like your business, right? So you have to be careful about the advice you get from everybody, because everyone's vested in getting something out of this game, right? So I think to me that is, the most important thing. Like, you can't underestimate how much like pre-work needs to go into it, how much like, and what a, and setting, a vision of what success looks like. I think for a lot of the domestic brands, it's much easier because it tends to be about short-term revenue. This is what my market share has got to look like. Because a lot of the marketers we work with, particularly in like local brands there and like domestic brands, like their shelf life in an organization is pretty limited. They might have like 2 to 3 years maximum to make an impact. And once they've made that impact, they're not going to like repeat that cycle. They tend to move on, right? So a lot of the time in that market, you're dealing with people, right? This is what I need to achieve in this window, and my window looks like 3 years. Now, if you're entering the market, you're going, right, well, what does success look like to me in year one? And you've got to have like, this is what the annual plan looks like, and this is like, what we've got to achieve. You can have agility within that plan, but you've still got to have that plan. This is what we need to achieve. Right? I've got a vision for the future, but I don't need a plan for past year one, right? I mean, like so much is going to change there. You'll learn so much in that, but what are those hurdles that you're going to jump over to get to where you need to be at the end of year one to prove whether this is a sustainable business or not? And I think that's to me absolutely mission critical.
Yeah, I've always thought it was to me so akin to sailing, right? Like we know we have a boat. And there are, on the horizon is the island we want to go to. But everything in between us and that is, we've got wind dependency, we've got currents, we've got waves, we've got, weather. It's like, we don't know if we're going to go left or we're going to go right or, but we're going to figure it out. At the end of the day, we'll end up there. We just might be, really wet by the time we get there.
We might be really wet, really hungry, and like, and without drinking water. But it's like, we'll
come limping in, but we'll make it.